It's great to have you here. We're excited. I'm semi-excited and semi-terrified by doing this workshop. Explain a little bit why. Before we planted our church in 2000, I was an associate pastor at Church Pastor Family Ministries. And so that's when our kids were younger, and I loved talking about parenting and teaching on parenting. We were involved when I went to seminary, John MacArthur's church. Our pastor, Gary Ezzo, was a family ministry guy, and he has an international parenting sort of ministry, and we got involved with that, and my wife and I facilitated for many, many years with hundreds of couples through some parenting stuff. And then I was a Canadian director for that, sort of as a side thing for that ministry for a while, and I loved all of that. But our kids were younger, and honestly, it was the physically exhausting thing of younger kids, but it was a very different experience. And the older our kids got, the more I kind of moved away from teaching anything on parenting, and kind of got to that place now. My wife and I have been married for 39 years this April, and we have 5 children. We wanted a lot of kids when we got married, and we had 2. And really, our oldest one, our son, was just one of those kids that challenged everything. And so we stopped having kids. And I mean stopped, like vasectomy stopped. And so then we went to seminary, and I think our kids were like 8 and 6 at the time we went to seminary. And then we took some parenting classes, really started to enjoy parenting again, and decided to have more like vasectomy reversal sort of. Like in the U.S. with no health care, $7,000 U.S. I had to pay for. And so we decided we'd have 3 to kind of make it more cost effective. And so our oldest is 37, then 35, then a 10-year break, 25. Am I right? 26, all right. My son Josh is here, which is really also terrifying me as well, because he's going to be shaking his head all through this. And 26, and it'll be 24 and 21. And so our older 4 are married, and our last one's getting married in June. And by God's grace, they all love the Lord and really overwhelmed with God's goodness in that. And then we have our 13th grandchild is due this March and still counting. And so we're excited by that. So we have some experience. But I've been asked by some of the other pastors, harvest guys in churches to do parenting conference. I've always said no. I got asked recently, and I said, you couldn't drag me kicking and screaming into doing a parenting conference. And here I am. And so I'm kicking and screaming in some way. And I just want to say this. When our kids were younger, I loved teaching on it. And it's not that we did everything wrong, but some of you know what I mean. The older you get, the more you look back and go, man, I just really, we have been brought to really be much more people of prayer. But also just, when you come from a weekend like this, you're going to go home. I'm going to. These commitments, these desires, and then all of a sudden you don't. And I just have found the older I've got, the more I've looked back and just said, boy, in spite of me, God has been very gracious. And so I don't want to stand up and say anything. But I'm going to trust the Lord in this and just share some things that I've learned. I'd like this to be practical. And we've already prayed. I feel like I should pray again just because I'm desperate, but God knows that. And so let's get started, okay? So I'm going to give you what I call 6 mandates. Mandates is kind of a loose term. I'm not throwing this at you like a harsh thing. Just if I could go back, some of these we did and some with mixed success. But if I could go back, these were some, and again, these are some theological, but also some very practical things. I'm going to try to give you just some real helps with some things here. I would encourage you, here's the challenge, is you hear things and you sort of make commitments, as I just said I have done over the years, and then you promptly forget about them. And I'll tell you, without a doubt, the most difficult thing in parenting, please hear this, the most difficult thing in parenting is not always knowing what to do, it's consistency. The most difficult thing in parenting is consistency, because life just goes on, and all the stuff of life goes on. And you let stuff slide from a discipline standpoint because you're busy, you're stressed, and you've got to go out and you've got to this and that. And then you let stuff slide from a discipleship and training side. And I'm just telling you. So here's what I would encourage you. If anything about what I share really resonates and you like, this may be of the Lord and we need to implement this, can I encourage you to go home and make specific plans to talk about it the next day or two, put it on your calendar a week from now, put it on your calendar 2 months from now. You've got to do something intentional to start to, because it takes at least 3 months to get a new habit. And so if you don't put some of these into just who we are and how we do it, they're going to be gone. And what I would hope is you don't have as many regrets as I do. All right, so just kind of be a little bit more proactive on this. So I'm going to share some things. And again, some we've done well, some we haven't, and we'll just leave all that to the Lord. So 6 mandates. Here's the first one. Be an encourager. Speak life, not death. Be an encourager. Speak life, not death. Now, everybody can encourage, and I'm sure, assuming all of you as fathers encourage, and so I get that, but I'm talking about be characterized by, be known as an encourager. Not just encourage sometimes. I was convicted last night. Like all these sessions are just wrecking. Is it happening to you too? Like just wrecking me. But one of the many things Paul Tripp said is that if your kids could write down 5 words it would describe, right? And I wonder if I don't know if my kids would write down encourager or that dad was a positive. My father-in-law, when we got married, my father-in-law is the sweetest. Now he's getting older. He's in his 80s now, and he gets pretty opinionated on politics and stuff. So if you're talking certain topics, he's a little fired up now. But my wife said she'd never seen her dad angry. My kids wouldn't say that. But she never had. And she said every day he came home, when he'd open the door, he'd say, hello, and just like cheery. And when he came, and that's all I know him is. I've been blessed with an amazing father-in-law and mother-in-law too. Just godly people, and it's like, boy, that is just amazing. That's what I'm talking about here. Be an encourager, and then speak life, not death. This idea of speak life, not death, Proverbs 18:21, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Proverbs 18:21. How about James 3:5-6? So also the tongue, a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great is a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. The tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life. And it itself is set on fire by hell. Our words, sticks and stones will break my bones and words will never. Are you kidding me? I was sharing with men's ministry on Monday night, and I was sharing, I'm 58, and when I was in grade 1, so I was 6 years old, 52 years ago, a music teacher told me we're all tested in our singing and had to stand up, and his thing, he rated you according to birds, and I remember him still, Mr. Jackson. I could almost paint a picture of him as an artist. And he said, Miller, you're a blackbird, and you'll always be a blackbird when it came to singing. That was bad, all right? Those words have plagued me, and I know it's crazy, and I should be over it, and it shouldn't affect me. And so, words have an effect. Words can bring death to a heart and a soul, a death to a child. You ever said something to your kids and watched those words just crush their spirit? Like, you know what I mean? Physically, you see. There's one thing to correct. There's one thing about tears, but you know what? Sometimes when in harshness, in anger, when you said, and you just see it right on them, they just are crushed. And words can speak death. John Piper says our words can make our marriages sweet, our families strong, our churches healthy. Tongues can give hope to the despairing and advance understanding and spread the gospel. And that's all true, but our words can also crush and ruin. I think that's why the psalmist said in Psalm 141:3, set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth and keep watch over the doors of my lips. Oh, that more dads would pray that prayer every day. Our words are powerful, man, powerful. Ephesians 4:29, how about this? Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths. We tend to think of that swearing, but that's not the only application of that. Let no corrupting talk come out of my mouth, but only such which is what? Good for what? Building up. How about we apply that in our families? Ephesians 4:29, only that which is building up and fits the occasion and what? May give what to those who hear? Grace. Grace. Well, speak words of life. Speak words that build up. Now, there's time for correction and all of that, but speak your words in such a way that even when you correct, Jesus was full of grace and truth. And so as dads, I think it's important because we dads can be harsh. We dads can have a critical tone. We dads can be demeaning at times. And sometimes it's from our own screwed up deals. Sometimes it's from perhaps how we were parented or how the boss is treating us or we're not getting along with your wife or whatever it is. There's stress over money and you're not aware of the power of your words. You need to learn to speak life into your family, words that build up and give grace. Speaking death or things like this. You're no good. Why do you always screw up? You can't do anything right. You're such a disappointment. You never amount to anything. You're lazy. Now, I know none of you guys would say those things. But in our anger, in our frustration, in our, rushed moment, when especially, okay, how many have, kids, your kids are under 10 right now? How many are in that? Okay, man, a lot of you. How many would have teenage, let's say 10 to whatever up? Okay, fewer. And so you guys know with the older kids, they get pretty good about pushing your buttons, right? And we have 2 daughters, 3 sons, and our youngest daughter, when she was getting married, just before she was getting married, and she'd had a couple years where she lived at home and stuff, but we had some difficult times. And just before she got married, I said to her, why, Sarah, why in some of those, why did we fought a lot, me and her? And she goes, some days I just got out of bed and decided it was a good day to have a fight with Dad. God will get you for that. And she wasn't really, her point, what was going on in her heart was just leading her that way. But they can push your buttons, and sometimes we can say these kinds of words. Speaking life words, though, I love you, I'm proud of you, But even when you have to correct or redirect or those kinds of things, instead of saying you're lazy, how about we say, listen, I want to remind you of how to work hard, and I know you can do it, and let me help you, Speak life, speak words of grace. Grace is speaking the truth still. But it's those words that now help redirect behavior and doesn't change the identity and doesn't redefine those kinds of things. Be an encourager. One author said this way, when we continually practice words of life, then God's goodness and God's grace is presented to our spouse, our children, and the world. Yet when we allow our communication to be casual, secular, filled with sarcasm, cynicism, I think that's a problem a lot of dads have, cynicism, vulgarity, we allow our negativism, then death are the seeds that are planted. And when I read that, I thought, here's the thing. Just picture this, guys. You're planting seeds of life in your children by how you speak, or you're putting poison into their heart, which will just do its awful work even when you're not around. The words you say have such profound impact on your children. I learned early on, and I didn't do this well. This is one of the areas of regret. I mentioned my father-in-law, but you men tend to set the tone in your home. I don't know if you know that. Now, some of you could argue that, and your wife does, but I would say the majority of the homes represented here, the men set the tone. They set the atmosphere in the home. Is your home characterized by a place where your kids love to be, your wife loves to be, where it's safe, where it's upbeat, where it's a place of grace and of mercy, where it's a place where they can feel safe? You set the tone, and you often do that by the words you speak. When you walk in the door, are you huffing? And, I come home, I'm tired. The older I get, the more tired I am. And I think if you ask my kids when Dad came home, I don't think any of them would say he walked in the door and said, hello, with a cheery kind of, they probably heard me sigh and drop my bag down and drop into a chair. But what kind of words are you characterized by? Do you need to go home right now and change the tone in your home? You say, well, I don't know if I can do it. Yes, you can. What's the fruit of the Spirit? What's the fruit of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. I'll tell you, if some of you guys went home and just said to your wife and kids, you know what? I just realized I have been sinful in how I've been speaking and the tone I've set in this home, and God convicted me. I'm telling you, some of your wives would break down. And some of your kids would be overjoyed because you have such a massive influence. God has given you such a gift. This thing called fatherhood is an amazing gift of influence that is just, it almost can't be measured. And so I just want to encourage you in that. Here's a tip. Each of these I'm going to try to give you a practical tip. This is something we learned in our parenting course when we first took it, and it was just part of an 18-week course, and we're just started again in our church. We used to do it in London and had hundreds of people from all sorts of churches taking it. It's on video, and we're just facilitating. And again, this year, we've got 4 weeks left with a group we're taking through, and it's my hope we'll do this every year. But something I learned in that's really, again, I did this sometimes, and you have to ask my kids if it meant something, but can I encourage you to do practical? Just write notes to your kids. Write notes. All right? Now, I know we're in the day you can email and text, and I've done some of that, and that's fine. but be a little bit old-fashioned and pick up pen and paper. And part of that is just curious here, because I think in our family for many years, it was my wife who wrote the birthday cards, signed the birthday cards, Chris, anything like that. How many would say that's true in your family? Your wife does that. All right, so that's more than half. And so then when we took this, one of the things my wife said is, you're taking that over. Now, I haven't done it all the time, but most of the time. But I'm the worst writer. You can't hardly read, and I can't spell for anything. I am atrocious speller and writer. But we just decided, so most of the birthday cards, I'd write the note. And some of your kids have never got a letter from Dad. They've never got a note from Dad. Here's the thing. Verbally speak life, not death to your kids. All right? Verbally speak it, but write it down. Because when you write it down, they have it and they hold it. Maybe you need to mail, snail mail. You know, they still have that. There's still a post office, you know. Or when if your kids are little and go to school, this is one of the things we learn at parenting. Just write a little note. You know, I'm so proud of you. I'm praying for you. Put it in their lunchbox or their lunch bag. Don't say anything. Just let them find it at lunch. Or maybe just leave a note at home for them, you know, in their bedroom or something like that. I mean, as a regular practice, if I could encourage you, just write notes and just speak life. You know, maybe you've had some problems or some difficulties and just write a note, but do it as a regular practice. Okay, can I encourage you in that? Because you know what, my dad's still alive, and I'm thankful. He's 84, and I love having conversations with him. I don't visit as much as I should and spend time and stuff, but it's so nice. But you know, you think if some of you guys would die to have a letter right now from your dad. Is that not true? That you could pick up on the bad days. You could pick up when you're feeling insecure. You could pick up when you got let go from a job, and you could read Dad's words that said, I'm proud of you. I love you. You know, pray, whatever it is. And maybe your dad wasn't that way, but you know what I mean. If your dad wasn't that way, what you would give to have that. So you have wonderful influence here, guys. I saw a hand or a question earlier. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. So I just leave little notes around the house. Just do that. And you know what? This works great with your wife as well. All right? It's because especially if your love language is words of encouragement, but even if it isn't, can I just encourage you? Why? Because here's what your kid, now maybe that's not going to mean as much to them, but I would guess most of them will keep the notes from Dad. All right? So Give this gift to your kids. Give these gifts of words. And if you've been a dad who's been harsh in your words, unkind in your words, then I do everything. Go see a biblical counselor. Get some help somehow. It has to change. Second thing, mandate. Give your children the greatest gift you can give them. Be Christ in your home. Be Christ in your home. Give your children the greatest gift. Be Christ in your home. Remember Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 11:1, be imitators of me as what? I am of Christ. Now listen, I guarantee your kids are doing part of that. They're doing their part. They're imitating you. They're imitating you. I remember, so we got married at 19. We were almost 20. We decided like 3 months into our marriage we wanted to have kids right away. I was still in college, and when you're young, it's like, well, that's fine. We'll figure something out. And anyway, so we got pregnant pretty soon, and so we didn't really have a clue what we were doing. We really didn't have a clue what we were doing. But I remember when Mike was just a little guy and just started walking, and I had a temper back then. Paul sharing last night about anger, and God has kind of been dealing with that. Now I just get irritable. And God's dealing. I went to see a biblical counselor. Well, why do I still get irritable? And it's just, I know it's wrong and I'm working on it. She goes, because you're proud. And it's like I got irritable with her because she told me I was proud. And quit seeing her. No, I didn't do that. But I used to have a lot more sort of outward expression, not at my wife or kids, but at the wall, at the door, at the other driver sort of thing. But I remember just when my little guy, just the first one, I remember I got mad and I went over and punched a wall, and then I saw him barely walking over and this little fist, and boom, and boy, that cut me. Now it didn't change me the way it needed to, but I still picture that and remember that. Your kids will imitate you guys. My dad had an anger problem. I love my dad. God's been so sanctifying him and everything, but I grew up in a house where my dad would blow up, and some of my kids struggle with that. Our kids, the question is, they're imitating us. Are we imitating Christ? Ask yourself that. You know, a survey done in Sweden, I did some research, I think it's accurate. 1994, this survey done by some group in Sweden, a whole bunch of statistics. Let me summarize one, though. If a father is non-practicing in terms of religious attendance, and I'm not saying Christian necessarily, just going to a church. If the father is non-practicing, but the mother's a regular churchgoer, all right, father doesn't go, doesn't nothing. Mom goes regularly. Only 2% of the children will go to church regularly when they get older. All right, now, but if the father is regular in church attendance, regardless of the mother and what she does, 66 to 75% of the children will go. So 2% go if mom, and 66 to 70, I'm not talking to Christian, I'm just talking go to church and make a sort of religious kind of thing. 2% versus 66 to 75, I'm telling you guys, your influence in the home is profound. And often, and we know this from, you guys know this, often the women in a church are more spiritually minded and spiritually passionate. Women's ministry and Bible study is always better attended than men's, almost always. And it's harder to get the men in the church moving spiritually than the women. And yet we have a greater influence in our kids' lives than even their mother. And so I just want to encourage you in this. The greatest gift you can give your kids is to be passionate about you may be nowhere right now spiritually, dry, dead, whatever. But everything we've learned, God can change, right? Because God is a God who's constantly changing us and sanctifying us, and God's a forgiving God. And you don't have to be this year who you were last year in your home. And God can do that. And so I just want to encourage you, get serious about your faith. If you love your kids, get serious about your faith. One of the things I would say we failed a lot in was devotionals, and that I had my family and the way we did it growing up, it screwed up me in some ways, and it just was a struggle for me. And I'm a pastor, and I'm just telling you guys honestly, it was a struggle. We did always talk about Christ and the things of God, and just ongoing, and their mother did a better job of more intentional, and it's just a failure on my part. But one of the things that was, we were just trying to constantly live out Christ. At least we weren't great at devotionals and family devotionals and that stuff. But I think the fact that there was a sincere sort of pursuing after and a passionate sort of commitment to, that God in His grace used that. I'm not excusing my failures in some of the things I should have been more intentional on. But I think so often, some of you, we sat down for family devotions, but what I saw outside of those 15 minutes did not match all the time. And my dad was not a sinful man overtly, but it just was for many years, just kind of wasn't where his heart was at. He was busy doing stuff. And so what's the most important thing is that your kids see you regularly pursuing Christ. All right? I think that's perhaps helpful. We had a baptisms last weekend in our services, and one girl, 19 years old, and it was so wonderful from her church. Her family's in her church, and I was so blessed as I heard her testimony at 19. She goes, the way my dad loved me and the way my dad would express his love to me, and I was just like, oh, that's so nice to hear, because you don't hear that anymore. Right? And she was just talking about my earthly father loved me, and when he'd express his love to me, it helped me understand how much more my heavenly Father, who's perfect, even though my earthly father is, how much he loves me. And I thought, boy, what an influence that dad is having. We're all failures in some ways, but to be able to, and so that's the influence you guys have. So I just want to encourage you. All right, if God and His Word and the church, I just love what Vance said. I had a chance after to chat with him in the green room, and I said, I was convicted again. I'm always about read the Word and prayer, read the Word and prayer. And so often I forget the whole purpose of that is to draw near to the Lord and not just check off, I read the Word and prayed. But if your kids, if that's not been who you are, men, and the gospel's not been important, change that now. Change that now. So if you want to give your kids a gift, the first gift to give them is be Christ in your home. Secondly, the third mandate here, give your children the second greatest gift. Love their, anybody? Mother. Good. It's a no-brainer, isn't it? The greatest gift you can give your kids is to live out Christ before them, and as best you can, and failing as we can, but to be passionate about that. But the second greatest gift you can give your kids is to love their mother. Now, listen, I know some are divorced, and I get that, but here's what I would just encourage you guys by. It may be very difficult because their mother might be very mean, unkind to you, downright spiteful or evil to you. All right? But here's what I will tell you. If you're a Christian and Christ is in you, you can return that, not with the same sort of attitude. You can return kindness and goodness and the fruit of the Spirit. And I know there's history, and I know it's very difficult. But Romans 12:18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Luke 6:27-28. Luke 6:27-28. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. So I get it. Some of you are in messed up situations, and your kid's mother is very difficult to love. But can I tell you that if we're to love our enemies and bless those who curse us, that certainly involves an ex. Even if, there's been financial or whatever else. And so just wanted to say that to you guys. Don't let your pain and hurt and heartache with her leak out over your kids. She's still their mother. She may not be a great mother in your opinion. But listen, men, one of the best things you can do for your kids, you can't change the fact that for those kids, that's mom. All right? And so I just want to encourage you to do your utmost there. But for the rest, I just want to say, and I've sat with so many men and women over I can't count the number of people now. I've been 25 plus years in pastoral ministry, and how many couples have sat and wrecked marriages. And I often ask this question, do you love your kids? If they have kids, do you love your kids? And without question, every single one of them says yes. I said, you love your kids more than, yes, love. Okay, here's the thing then. If you really love your kids, then you will give your utmost to fixing this marriage. And when they won't, then I say to them, the reality is you don't love your kids as much as you love yourself. You love yourself more than you love your kids. I'm dead serious on this. Because if you truly love your kids, you will do everything to make this marriage. Now, it might not be possible because it takes two. But you will do everything to make this marriage what God designed it to be. That's the best way you can love your kids. And I just want to encourage you on that. It is so important to understand this. Because I really believe too many of us just love ourselves. We want happiness, the so-called nonsense of the world, and this, I want to be happy, I want this and that, and we love ourselves, and we're going to walk away. And it used to be when people would divorce, they would say, oh, kids are flexible, and they'll be okay, and they can adjust, and all of that. But every study is showing that's not true. Now, God can be gracious in things, but I'm telling you, listen, your kids get their security from knowing mom and dad are okay. And I can't overemphasize that. We have seen it play itself out in so many. Your children's security, contentment, and well-being and everything about them come from knowing mom and dad are healthy and happy. Mom and dad are in a good, solid, loving relationship. The best thing you can do for your kids is to make the marriage a priority relationship. This whole helicopter parenting and child-centered parenting thing is wrecking the family. Your kids are a welcome addition to the family. You see, when there was two of you, when you stood and said your marriage vows, you had a family, all right? It was you and your wife, and that's the priority relationship. I believe exegetically I can show you that from Genesis 1 and 2. That's the family. That is the priority relationship, and children are a welcome addition to, not the center of. And so the best thing you can do for your family and your kids is to love their mother and to work on the marriage relationship. It's so important. Listen, the best thing you can do for your kids is obviously the walk with Christ and living out Christ. The next best thing you can do is to love their mother so she feels loved and safe and treasured and valued and special. She feels nourished and cherished as Ephesians 5 calls us to love her. That's not just best for her, that's the best thing for your kids. It's so important to understand this. Again, if you say you can't do it, the fruit of the Spirit, you can't do it, I can't do it, but Christ can do it in us. We've seen this in doing parenting stuff with hundreds of families over the years. You know, even little toddlers who can't hardly speak, they have radar. Do you know this? They have radar for when mom and dad are not in a good place. They can't verbalize it. A lot of your kids can't. Older kids can start to say, "What's going on, Mom? What's going on?" Because mom and dad haven't talked to each other for 3 days, you know. But the little kids, they have radar for it. They know something's not right. And they can't voice it, and they don't even understand it. So I just want to give you a few ideas here on how you can work on this and how you can bless your kids with this. Can I encourage you, first of all, to talk and interact kindly and gently with your wife? Another thing I was very convicted on, they're taping this, right? I like it when things stay in the room. But I'll just share this with you guys. And my wife came to me last September and said, you know, and what Paul described it perfectly last night, sadly, to my shame, I say this, where my wife was feeling like every time she talked to me, I had no interest. She just knew I wasn't interested in what she had to say. She'd been kind of gently sort of bringing that up for a while, and then it was kind of a come to Jesus conversation she had with me. And that was September. In November, we went to Detroit to a marriage conference put on by a big ministry in the States, and we weren't in a bad place, but that was bad on my part. My wife was not feeling like she had my heart at all. And so we went to marriage and just worked, and it's been much better. But I was just convicted again last night. It's kind of just been, I'd have to go home and ask her, how have I been? Because I'm afraid maybe I'm slipping right back. I just haven't thought about it in the last month or so. And guys, listen, if you want to love your kids and you want to be a good dad, it starts with your marriage relationship. It starts with how you talk to their mom. Are you angry? Are you short? Are you irritable? Are you unkind with her? Or does she feel loved, treasured, and valued? The second thing I want to encourage you, just practical stuff here, guys. Date your wife. Now, some of you with young kids, can I tell you, I see it now. Some of you have young kids. You will not leave those kids and go on a date. That is bad. All right? Now, I know maybe your wife's the one who doesn't want to leave. I'm not saying like a week old leave them, all right? But I see way too much. It's child-centered parenting. And listen, it's not what's best for your kids. Can I encourage you? Listen, your kids, if you're not working on your marriage, then it's going one way or the other. It's either getting better or it's getting worse. And if you're not intentionally making it a priority relationship in the family, then it's getting worse. And you might not see it. And we're now heading into empty nest, and that's part of the thing we're processing now. Who are we apart from the kids? You know, when we have more time together. And so can I encourage you, man, date your wife. If you're just thinking we're fine, and it's not. And if you're thinking we'll do everything as a family, I'm telling you, that's not what's best for your kids. Your kids, it's just part of I'll get to this in a minute, we'll release in the funnel, and all of what we ever do as parents is release them out to, you know, but part of that is your kids need to know mom and dad go out and mom and dad come back. And that helps produce security in your kids. But you need to go for some dates with your wife. And some of you, we teach this in our parenting thing, you need to remind your wife she's a wife first and a mother second. Now do that very carefully, okay? And don't quote me. I'll kill you if you're throwing me under the bus. Norm said, and I'll have all these women, they'll be giving me dirty looks. But see, the DNA, you know this, right? The DNA for mom is so strong, and she's so oriented to, and that child needs her. And so it's so easy. So graciously keep reminding her, honey, it's us. Let's spend some time with us. Now, it may take you a while to get there, and you may need this too, because I see a lot more dads have fallen into this thinking too. The best thing you can do for your kids is to just make sure you and your wife have regular date nights where you're building your relationship. And go away for some weekends, once or twice. So a lot of you younger guys don't. David Barry was a writer in Canada, I think in the U.S., and a comedic kind of writer. And I remember early on, because somebody gave us this advice, we go away for a couple weekends. And this is weird for my son, but David Barry called them wicked weekends away. And then it's like, you're going to a hotel for a couple nights. You know what I mean? I don't need to get any further into any of this, right? Yeah. Now, he says when you get kids and you're so run off your feet, the joy of a wicked weekend away was to have uninterrupted time to read the newspaper. And But can I just encourage you in this? This is part of really how you are going to bless your kids and be a good dad, is to work on the marriage relationship and build into your relationship with your wife. So she has your time and she has your attention and she feels loved. And you have some special times for you and her. And so I think that's really important to do that. And then one more thing, and this is in our parenting stuff that is profound. Now, this is for free, guys. I'm just telling you, if you put this in, you will be shocked no matter what ages your kids are. It's called couch time. And it's from the Ezels and the parenting thing. Couch time. Practice couch time. What couch time is, especially you with little kids, when you both arrive home, whether it's both of you out working or just one of you, when you both arrive home, you kiss the kids, you say hello, and then you and your wife spend 15 minutes just you two talking. All right, now there's some real wisdom behind this, especially with little kids. But a lot of your little kids never, ever see mom and dad having time together because you have time together when? When the kids go to bed. But they need to know mom and dad are good. And they need to know mom and dad is a priority relationship. And so when our kids were little, they'd be in the playpen. And when they got a little bit older, they had a mat. Do you remember, Josh? They had a little carpet, a 2x3, and they bring some toys. And so they come say hi, how you doing? Give them a kiss. All right, now it's couch time. So you guys go in a playpen or sit on the couch, and then you've got to train them because they can't interrupt you every 2 minutes. But so kind of you got to be in line of sight with the little ones because you know what happens when they get out of line of sight. So I mean, there's ways to work them, but every single day, couch time. I'm just telling you, some of you will see with your younger kids some things like it's amazing the things we saw this solve in some of the kids' lives and some things happening. I mean, kids who couldn't sleep through the night, or kids, one family I know, the kid had a stutter. It's not always this, I know that, but it's amazing. Why? Because all of a sudden they start seeing that mom and dad are good. It's just a practical little thing, guys. I'm telling, and I'll tell you the other thing. Your wife will love this. Because she knows at least she's just this little catch up, just kind of how you doing, and just uninterrupted couch time. All right. Number 4 mandate. Number 4. Cultivate family identity. Also called this make your name stand for something. Cultivate family identity. I'm doing last winter I took our men's ministry, which runs Monday nights through the ministry year, and last winter I did some weeks. This year I'm doing 10 weeks on identity, 10 whole weeks on a man's identity. I think for most of us, we're really screwed up in our identity. It comes from all the wrong places, and there's a biblical identity we should have. And so we're in week, I think, 4 or 5 right now in this study. And so it's kind of fresh but this is something we learned years ago as well in parenting. And identity is really that it's this thing, who am I? It's your self-identity. Who am I? Who do you think? And a lot of guys don't even think about this. But it's been programmed into our hearts and minds, and even some ways our subconscious by various people and experiences, and even from our own internal voice. Just this last Monday night, we were looking at relationships and how relationships, I gave them 6 different relationships, your mother, your father, your wife, your friends, your kids, 6 different relationships, and how they've either set or influenced your identity, your sense of self, and how much of that's reality. But I'm not talking about your mother and father, but some of you need to figure that out because you need to get your identity, you're a new creation in Christ, and we need to understand, but others influence our identity and others influence how we see ourselves. But listen, guys, I'm telling you right now as a father, you have the most profound influence in shaping your child's identity. It goes back to the first point I talked about, speaking life, not death. I want you to understand how crucial your role is in what you're putting into your child's mind that doesn't just affect them for their childhood years and not just their teenage years, not just their 20s, it all the way up to like a 58. I'm still figuring out my identity and trying to fix and correct and change some things. Some, like I said, set by Mr. Jackson when I was 6 years old, and some set by my dad or my mom or by other people. And so I would just say dads, I think, have probably the greatest influence. And you men need to keep this in mind. And just in terms of, let me talk about family identity. Family identity. You have a last name. Now, I know some cultures have, combined names and everything, maybe you, but like for us, we're Millers. And for my extended family, my dad, he did a good job of cultivating because he put some certain values and he would teach us kids. We're millers. And so one of the things, we're honest. That was one of the things my dad wanted us to have, is that our reputation in the neighborhood, we lived in a little town of Delaware outside of London, and he wanted any dealings with business, anybody, he wanted to know the millers were honest people. My dad put some identity. We were hard workers. He was always like, that's who we are. And so there's certain things. And so we've kind of identified this. So we have our 5 kids, and now, there's spouses and grandchildren, and we would often talk about, and you need to talk about this with your family. You need to set some virtues and values, and you need to disciple those into your children. And I would tie it to your name. This is who we are. Your kids will often say, well, so-and-so doesn't have to, so-and-so. And it's like, I don't care about so-and-so because we're millers. This is who we, not in a proud way. I'm not setting ourselves above, but give some identity, because all the peer pressure and all of that stuff, you've got to give your kids a family identity. Think about your family. You, dad, set this. Just like you set the tone in your house, you set this. Like Paul Tripp said, if they wrote 5 words, I wonder if your kids wrote 5 words about what our family is, what would they write? We think when we started learning this, we tried to help our children see our family, because there's an identity thing. Now, let me just explain this identity thing in a family. Picture a family as a number of people, mom and dad, let's say a couple kids, and they're standing in a circle, and they're facing inwards, and they're holding hands. That's called an interdependent family. That's what you want. All right, now the children are not in the middle, and like my wife and I didn't hold hands and put all our kids in the middle. That's a child-centered picture, because now they're the center of this. No, it's us. So Cindy and I started holding hands, looking at each other, and then we added a child. They're a welcome addition to our family. And so we build a circle, and we're looking in, we're interdependent, and we're holding hands. And an independent family is when you're standing in a circle and you're all looking outwards and probably not holding hands. Now, why does that matter? Where do you get your values from, and where do you get the influence, and who has influence? Peer pressure is only as strong as family identity is weak. Peer pressure is only as strong as family identity is weak. So build the family identity. You with little kids, there's so many in this room, work on this now, because when they get to their teen years, listen, there's peer pressure, and we get that, but it's only as strong as you are weak in your family. So the stronger you build your family identity, the less that peer. Why? Because you're standing in a circle looking in, and you can see families like this. When their teens are there, they like being with each other, and they like being together. We homeschooled through a lot of our years, and about grade 11, our kids went to the public system, and we kind of, every year, kind of just decided that. And we started in LA. We weren't going to homeschool when we started, took them out of the system because the gangs had moved in there when we were at seminary. And so anyway, we kind of experienced in all of it. But when our older 2, who happened, because they were close in age, we ended up homeschooling in the same grade, just because it was easier. So they both went to high school together. And a lot of people we found out after thought they were boyfriend and girlfriend, because they talked to each other and they would hang. They had other friends. But siblings typically don't talk to each other at school. But the identity thing is because why? We love each other and we have relationship. And so build that family identity, man. Picture it that way. Is where if they're independent family, they're looking out. And so now what's influencing them? Media and TV and friends and even think about teachers or who has influence into their life. We wanted the primary influence into our kids' lives. We did a study for a while and added up how many hours they spent with different people and what were the values of those people, because we wanted to understand how they were influencing our kids. And we wanted to be the primary influencers into our kids. So think about cultivating family identity. You don't force family identity. You don't insist it. You can go home and say, here kids, here's a list. This is who we are. All right, you can try and force it. It'll never work. You cultivate it slowly over time, again, because you're living out. And so one of our family identities is we want to be people who love Christ and love the church. Our identity is, I don't care what other kids, we didn't put our kids in a lot of sports, organized sports. Now, there's nothing wrong with those, but because of our identity, part of that was we love Christ, we love the church, and it's going to interrupt some of those things. And there's nothing wrong with skipping a service, and I'm not like getting legalistic on you. But one of the things we decided was they can love some sports and do some things, but it's not going to take them every weekend out. And this was before I was a pastor. Some of you are going, well, you're paid to do it and stuff. I came out of business career, and back then we just decided this was part of our identity. And so just think about these things, of how you do these things. Cultivate them. Shared memories. This is a tip here. Build shared memories. Build shared memories. Why? Because those are identity issues. So I mentioned my wife and I go away for a hotel for a couple times a year, and we would take our kids once or twice to a hotel. Find a hotel in the winter. One of the best things you can do. We got one in London that has like this big covered area, and it's got a pool. Anybody in London, the Best Western in Wellington, palm trees and this. And so we would go there, in the winter. Or Niagara Falls has some great deals. Josh, how many times we Niagara Falls, right? And you go midweek, and there's hardly anybody there. You have the pool to yourself. And so why we would take our kids. We'd have our weekends where we go away. We would have time where we take the kids. Why? Because we wanted to build family identity, shared memories together. And so repeat them. We go to Florida each year. We couldn't always afford it. We would save up, and we'd rent a house in Florida. We didn't do the restaurant. I'm an introvert, so too many people kill me. You're all terrifying to me. And I can't wait to get alone. I love you all, but I need my alone time. But I'm not going to do the hotel restaurant. So we would rent a house that had a pool, and we would not do anything. We would literally go to the grocery store, but we hung out together for 2 weeks. And then each year, so the next year you go back, we're talking about the memories last time. Remember when, right? And you go, and then it's I remember this, I remember that. And then you do it again, and you didn't. What are you trying to do? You're intentionally building memories, but what you're doing is building a family identity. It's the same thing about going to church, serving in church. Can I just encourage you guys on this? You're trying to put virtues and values into your children. Now, I'm not talking entity in the self-esteem. Our system, the identity thing, has gone into this self-esteem nonsense. Now, I know I'm not trying to dismiss the whole thing, but it's like nailing Jell-O to a tree. They try to form this identity in kids now, but it's not built on the substance of what actually lasts and what really takes root. And you can do this, men. You need to work at this. You need to be aware of this. Number five mandate. Protect their innocence. Protect their innocence. Wisdom, not worldliness. Let me explain it this way. I grew up, and some of you, probably not many as old as me, but some maybe. So I grew up in a generation which was ignorance when it came to moral issues. My parents never talked to me about anything. Never had the birds and the bees talk, which I was kind of okay with. I didn't want but nothing. There was ignorance. My generation grew up on ignorance. So my generation, when they became parents, they swung the other way from ignorance to indulgence, and that's not where we're to go. Ignorance is not the answer. Indulgence is not. And I think we now are living in a world that indulges kids before they're morally ready, even with educational things. The biblical place, I believe, is moral innocence. Not indulgence, not ignorance, but moral innocence. I think I can prove this exegetically. The Bible uses euphemisms and figurative language for sexual things. Now, so often we think that's because they were ignorant, uninformed people and didn't have the language. That's nonsense. They had technical terms for everything. They had technical terms for sex and body parts and all of that. They did. They weren't lacking in any of that. They were very educated, very, there wasn't. Why then why do they know? Why does it say Abraham knew his wife? Why couldn't it say Abraham had intercourse with his wife or Abraham had sex with his wife? Why does it say he knew his wife? Because some areas in this idea of moral things, the idea of privacy and the idea of intimacy and the idea, they use euphemisms and they use figures. So we don't want our kids ignorant. That's not good. But we've swung to a place of indulgence, and I think we're called to protect the moral innocence. Because kids, as they grow cognitively, their brains can't handle certain things. And then morally and things. And so, your kids, you don't want them ignorant. I know the fear, some kid in the neighborhood or somebody. And so I'm not talking about ignorance. But I think we've swung to the other place now where we're taking kids at 3, 4, or 5, or our whole educational thing in Ontario. And you all know what I'm talking about. And that's the perfect epitome of indulgence. And we're called to protect their moral innocence. And I think biblically, scriptures speak about these things. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians 7 about the idea, it's not, the wife doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the husband doesn't. He says, don't deprive each other. Some of this is your life verse, right? Don't deprive each other except for agreed limited time to devote to prayer and then come together again. So, but the whole point is that God's designed some of these things to be in private, not public. And even the idea now of what our children are exposed to, and the big fear, and it's one of my pet peeves with youth ministry. Youth ministry, well, we got to tell them everything because they're going to hear it anyway. Well, the answer to the fact they're overindulged is not let's indulge them ourselves. That's not the answer. And so our calling, especially as dads, and I hope you feel this, well, not just with your girls, but with your boys as well, is to help protect their moral innocence. And so you start with your younger children and you try to, and it is. Listen, if you're younger kids, you're not protecting their environment in some way, then you're not doing a good job in your parenting. You don't let them go play out by a busy road. Why? Because they're not able to handle that when they're a toddler. They have to have the skill set, and it's the whole thing when it comes to moral things, The stupidity of parents, well, my son's going to drink anyway, so I took him out and let him get drunk with me. Are you crazy? I get that. That's the world's idea, and that's that you don't have to just resign yourself to indulgence. That's not the solution. The solution is to study and understand a little bit about moral innocence and the whole idea. And I mentioned the funnel. So parenting is this. Listen, is from birth. Think about it. From birth is the place where your child's the most dependent ever, right? That kid can't feed themselves. They can't turn over. They can't move. Nothing. If something happens there, that's the apex right there. The fullest, most complete dependence. Our goal now is to release them to independence, to adulthood, and it's a releasing of the funnel. Now, guys, you get it. If your funnel's like this, and you're like our youngest son is about 6'5", and we live about a block from a park. And my wife there's the kids, the fifth one, you're always more protective with the fifth one, and the last one. And so he's walking to the park, at 5 p.m. with his friends. Oh, I don't know if he should go, he's 6'5" and 20 years old. Let the boy go to the park. She's not quite that extreme, but we've had a few of those discussions because sometimes we dads need to push the envelope, because it's like this, And so that's some of the parents, we want to do this, you want to isolate them so much. Homeschoolers can be guilty of this. We're going to keep them out of the world. There's nothing wrong with homeschooling that, but listen, the main issue they fight with is the condition of their own heart. Now, we believe in moral innocence, not indulgence, so there's nothing wrong with putting some parameters and things, but it's not this, all right? But it's also not this. Too many of us release the funnel too fast. And a 6-year-old is not ready to handle something that maybe a 12-year-old can handle. A 12-year-old is not ready to handle something that a 19-year-old. And so, guys, you got to start thinking through this. Release the funnel, and it's part of parenting, and you release them to full adulthood. But don't do it too fast, but don't do it too restrictive. But what I'm dealing with here is, I think too many, and our Christians now, too many of us have released that funnel far too fast when it comes to moral stuff. And this has to deal with cell phones and social media. And I know everybody, and I get all of that. And so what happens is we give into it. The hard part of parenting is consistency. And I remember when we were getting bombarded with, when can I get a cell phone? When can I get all my friends have a... Think through it, not just from the side way you have them, but of moral innocence. How can I protect their innocence and their exposure on some of these things? You've got to just kind of be careful on this. Boundaries and moral fences and all of that stuff. And especially, can I just encourage you with your boys? And I don't think we've done well all the time, but the world we live in is so difficult. Robbie's sermon was so powerful, wasn't it? And you all know the world, and I used to tell my kids this all the time, like there's boundaries. Our staff have moral fences, we have moral fences, and as our family, there's a lot of things we just choose not to do. Why? A fence, I can climb a fence if I want to, but I'm not going to wander into sin. Sin requires secrecy and opportunity, typically. And so we remove secrecy and opportunity. That helps us. Those are moral fences. All right, but sometimes, and our kids don't understand. Your kids don't understand. I would say to my kids, listen, because they say, well, I can handle it, I'm a Christian. I have good commitment. I can handle it. And here's what I'd say. Listen, life hasn't given you the ability to know what I know. I know the power of temptation far better than you know the power of temptation. You know, I used to argue this with my wife when we were first dating and married. She had a zero tolerance policy, even way back then. If a movie had any nudity at all, like 30 seconds, we're not. There's just, I remember her walking out of the room, turning the TV off, and then here I am in my fleshliness trying, it's just a 30 seconds, there's nothing wrong, and like trying to defend it all. And she just set the standard and called me to that, rightly so. But so many of us excuse, is this not true, men? We excuse it away and we downplay it and all of this stuff. And we got to be careful with that in our own lives. We need to be careful with this with our kids. You know, the standard has slipped so far that now what we're allowing in our lives and then we're putting in our kids can't handle it. They're not that we can, but they're just, like, think about it. What a 15-year-old kid is now exposed to. You know, you say, well, it's just a little bit, it's not bad. I heard a story in our parenting thing. I just got a couple more things and we'll open it up, but this will maybe help you. So a father had a couple boys who wanted to go to the movie theater and see a movie, and the father said, let's check into it. Found out there was one scene of nudity and just very brief, you know, and it was part of the story. That's how everybody justifies. It's part of the plot line. It's not gratuitous sex, right? And so the father said no, and the boys kept pushing. So the father said, come back tomorrow and I'll give you a final answer. So they came back the next day, and Dad was sitting there on the couch, and he had a little a dish of brownies there. And he said, all right, guys, here's the deal. You can go watch the movie if you eat a brownie. And they said, well, that's a good deal. We like brownies, you know, squares, right? And so he said, but before you eat the brownie, I just want to tell you, because you say this movie just has a little bit of nudity, is nothing bad. There's one ingredient in the brownies. I went out in the backyard and got some dog dirt. And I put just a little dog dirt. You get the point, right? We start justifying everything and we start excusing it away, right? You know, a little bit of impurity is not pure. It's a little bit of anything that's other than holiness is not holy, and we're called to holiness. But for our kids, we live in a world that has, everything has slidden into compromise and excuse. And guys, our job, let's get back to a little bit of the virtuous sort of fatherhood picture. My job with my daughters is to protect them morally and protect the environment, protect those who are around them. I used to teach our boys that one of the things of being a Christian man is if anybody comes to threaten, whether it's a woman you're with, a girl you're with, or even if it's a guy, if you're stronger, then your calling as a man is to step forward and sacrifice yourself. I believe that's part of the call to be a man, is that, you know, if somebody's going to suffer. And we need to get back a little bit to the virtuous thing, and I think this has to do with morals as well. One final thing, and then we've got a few minutes for questions. Number 6, allow them to fail. Grant them freedom to learn and grow. Allow them to fail. And on all of these, you can ask my son if you want on which ones we failed at and which ones we succeeded. I don't know. I honestly don't have a clue on some of these, but here's what I know we're shooting for. Allow them to fail. Grant them the freedom to learn and grow. And so, again, I think you men have to help your wives. And we live in a world that has moved to this child-centered helicopter parenting thing. And I'm not saying it's all bad. I know there needed to be changes. I'm sorry if I've insulted you. And I'm not saying it's all bad. But listen, part of the releasing of the funnel and part of what we need to do with our kids is we need to help them have that safe place where they can expand and explore. And I used to run a boys group in our church. Some of you would remember Christian Service Brigade and Battalion, and I ran that. I grew up in it, and we shut it down so we started it back up, and that was an area where we could take teenage boys out camping and things and let them learn and grow and explore some things. But listen, you've got to think this through. A 10-year-old being careless on the bike might break their arm, but a 17-year-old being careless with a car may kill himself or someone else. A 13-year-old girl having her heart crushed by a first love is painful, and if you've been there, trust me, it is very painful when it's your daughter. But a 19-year-old young woman may end up pregnant or used and abused by a man. And so when we say let them fail, think it through, talk with your wife carefully. But I think we're overprotective in some ways, I think, and not just that. I think some of us are not creating a safe environment where our kids, listen, can know they're always loved and always accepted even if they fail. And my dad used to tell me, failure without effort is unacceptable, but failure with effort is acceptable. And so I just encourage you in this, maybe maybe you need an adjustment in this so your kids can learn how to kind of release that funnel with you. And anyway, I'm going to stop there. I got a few more things, but any questions on this? I think we're almost out of time, but yeah. Yeah. So 12-year-old daughter and not really talking when you're driving around. Can I encourage you, in teen years, here's the thing. Teenage rebellion is not a rejection of rules, it's a rejection of relationship. Teenage rebellion is a rejection of relationship, not rules. Now that's important because here's the answer to teenage rebellion, what will help you. We tend to pursue rules, and there needs to be some rules. We've been through this, okay, what are the basic, what are we going to live? But the thing is, when you have a kid either just getting distant or pursue relationship. The answer is pursue relationship. And pursue relationship in times of non-conflict. Often the only time we talk to our kids seriously and try and teach them is in a conflict, and that's the worst time. So I would say, be intense, start taking her out on dates, 12 years old, and I would say every 2 weeks or something, plan a date. It's a dad date, and you're just going to take her out, and it might take 2 or 3 months before she opens up, but you just be there. And one of the things we learn in our parenting thing is the window of the heart. Kids will open, when your kids, they're little kids, you put them to bed, and all of a sudden you're just tucking them in, and then they say, Dad, and they want to talk. Usually it's to delay going to sleep. But what it is they open up the window, and they're going to open up the window, and they're going to let you inside. That is incredibly precious. So men, don't go in and reorder their private life. And don't go in and criticize and tell them so I would just say, you pursue relationship. Best thing to do is take them out on dates, and just literally tell her, I'm going to try to show you what a Christian man should be like and what a date should be like. Open the car door, pull out her chair, teach her, but then just pursue relationship in times of non-conflict. And then wait and let her open up. And I think as she feels, Dad's intentional and he's not, 2 dates and he's dropped this. And so I think that you pursue, let's face it, from 12 or 11 up till 19, and you might say like 58, they're still trying to figure themselves out. They don't know who they are. They don't know they got emotions and feelings. They don't have a clue what it is. So we do our best with that. Another question? Anything? Sorry, I'll come here next.
Kids 24 and 20. Something I still struggle with is, where does grace, Christ gave me a lot of grace, where does grace, the boundary between grace and enablement?
Yeah. I don't know. Questions between grace and enablement with kids, especially in their 20s. Grace and truth, we believe Jesus was full of grace and truth. And, I was one of the guys this weekend talked a little bit about that. There's still consequences, and even the releasing the funnels where we struggled with that. I honestly, that's a tension that we've always, and Cindy and I have not always been on the same page on that one. And this is, so this is releasing the funnel. And so I remember with some of our kids, when they started going out with their teenage friends on their own and I wasn't there, they didn't know this, but sometimes I followed them to see if they were going where they said they were going to go, and then I came home. And so that was sort of my thing of, I didn't want to be an ignorant dad and unaware, and I wanted to trust them, and then after that I could trust them. Now, maybe I was twisted and distorted in that. You should never do it, but I don't know, man. That's that kind of... I'm sorry. I just meant we had one here.
We have 4 kids between 3 and 9, and they are having influences on each other too all the time, right? And some of those are negative, but how do you keep from getting to that position where you feel like you're going from one thing to the next as they sort of are having those influences on each other?
Yeah, so kids influencing each other, and usually the oldest wants to be the second parent to the younger ones too, right? And so, like, I don't know, you talking in sibling rivalry and fighting and stuff, or are you just more talking in...
Maybe some of that, but just general, like, say, unkindness, for example, to each other.
Yeah.
But there's so many dynamics at play, and I know as they get older, they may even try and draw us into that more often.
Right. So part of what you're trying to do in parenting, you're discipling the heart of the child, right? And so this is part of, if teaching the moral reason why is a big part of parenting. You start out when they're young. So ages basically 0 through 6 is kind of like the discipline years. It's just kind of because like it's like football. Remember anybody play football? You go to the first week, hell week, right? It's just you need to learn to come under the authority and just do it because. So why? Because I'm the dad. That's why. Now there is some moral reason why starting in there, and then usually 6 to 12 is the training years where you're starting to coach more intentionally. You can start it when they're younger, but the moral reason why? Here's why. Because now they've learned to discipline, they've learned to submit, so now they can learn because they can place themselves under. 6 to 12, you're now planting the moral reason why, and you're building the warehouse, the moral warehouse. 12 to 18 are kind of like the coaching years, like scrimmages, right? Where you can stop the game and they come home and you can drive them and you can coach them before they go and debrief after, and then 18 plus are the friendship years, hopefully. So I think part of what the years you're into is really putting the moral reason why. So why do we treat people with respect? Biblically, here's why. Why, all these things, property, justice, respect. So I think part of that is trying to train all of that. And then part of what you need to do, especially with 4 kids, is help them learn how to resolve conflict themselves and how to do that. But I think if you're training them all in the sort of the moral reason why and trying to train the heart of the children. And then guys, you got to figure out a whole discipline approach that's consistent and not subjective. It's got to be objective. And it's one of the things in parenting thing we work through, because you've got to deal with skills separate from moral issues. And then when it comes to moral issues, you've got to, have we trained them or do they not know? And like when you get to biblical chastisement, that's for acts and attitudes of rebellion, not because dad's had a bad day and dad's stressed and you stepped on dad's last nerve. And so I think it's a lot of training you're into now. But I would train a lot on the moral reason why, help them understand, not just stop doing that, but help sit down and help them explain why, the biblical. I don't know. It's just a long process you're in, and I wouldn't expect a lot of, you just got to stay at it. You just got to stay. You'll see changes, but one more question, and then we're.
Yeah, we were pretty constant with what you were saying till about 16, and I couldn't work anymore because of my injuries, and those are important years. He didn't see me work, right? I couldn't work. I was lying around. I was in pain. And he's 22 now, and he's lost that whole section that he needed. And he's in that indulgence, self-indulgence, and everybody owes me. And he sort of still goes to church, but he's hooked into gaming.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to deal
So
with
he's
that.
22,
Yes.
and so he's a millennial. And I'm not sorry. I'm not. It's not fair. We pick on millennials, but every generation has stereotypes, and I do think it's part of the culture they've grown up in, and every generation has their cultural distinctives, and that's part of that cultural. I think that's part of the overindulgent. I think that's part of in a sense, when you have a child centered, that the world revolves around them. And video games are one thing, which is a separate issue. That really was it. Vance who just talked about that. It just like that, just the stuff that produces is horrific. But I think part of this struggle with 20-somethings right now is that they're the first generation raised on relativism, and that they're the center of everything, and it's our own fault. It's just a flesh. We all have that problem. It just shows itself in different ways. So I think, you get somebody, you disciple them, sometimes another man can say what we have trouble saying to our kids, or they have trouble hearing from us. And so I would go find somebody, ask somebody if they would disciple your son, if he'd be willing to do that. And it might be helpful for somebody else to say what maybe he doesn't want to hear from dad right now. But at 22, he's kind of a boy in a bit of in a man's body, and right, and that takes some hard conversations and some discipling out of that. So listen, guys, let me pray and be done. And anyway, hopefully something in this has been helpful. And is that okay? Okay, all right. Father, thanks for these guys and this time together. Thank you for their desire to be better fathers. And we just, anything that I've shared here that's not of you, that's not biblical wisdom, what principle, whatever, Father, would you purge it out of their hearts and minds? Last thing we need is man's wisdom, man's ideas, especially in this area that's so important of fatherhood. Thank you for your word tells us you give our children to us as a gift. It's a stewardship. They're stewardship responsibilities. They're your children that you entrust to us. And Father, help us in our frailness, in our failures, in our weaknesses, in the fact that we're still constantly in process in our own sanctification, our own maturity, while you're calling us to disciple another one and to raise up these children. And so we feel our inadequacy, but thank you that our hope is in you and you're more than able. Thank you for your Spirit who dwells in us, that you have given us all we need for life and godliness and to be the kind of fathers you call us to be. And so thank you for forgiveness, and thank you for the renewing work of your Spirit, that we can be a different dad on Monday than we were on Friday. Thank you for that. And so, Father, our prayer is not that we would work harder and be more determined, but that we would be more submissive and yielded and filled with your Spirit. And I pray that you would help every one of us to just be more of who you called us to be, that we would be a blessing to our children, that they would have the joy of being able to say, my dad wasn't a perfect man, but I'm so thankful for him. And Father, for those of us who have made mistakes and are feeling like the cattle are out of the barn now, what can we do? Father, thank you that you're more than able. We pray for all the prodigals in this room. Father, we pray for those children who are walked away. Maybe they're 15 or maybe they're 25 or whatever. We pray. And so our hope is in you. Help us in this great high and holy calling of fatherhood. In Jesus' name, amen.